Chapter 22. Wow, Imogen breathed as she looked around the paddocks. Bailey, this is amazing. It truly was amazing. There was a small barn in the center of the property, a beautiful red barn that seemed so quintessentially Vermont, and surrounding it in a semicircle were a series of paddocks, some grass and some filled with what looked like sand or small rocks. Happy horse sneezes filled the air as they grazed, dotting the fields, tails swishing the air as they batted the remaining flies that hadn't yet died off in the cooler weather. Imogen looked past the paddocks to what looked like round, white tents raised on wooden platforms. There must have been about 8 of them, dotted on the outskirts of the area just before the tree line. Tucked away in the woods, it was like a big clock with the barn at the center, only broken up by the gravel drive in and out, and a large open pavilion with a fire pit where she now stood with her friend. Bailey beamed, proud of her business. She had been thrilled when Joe suggested Imogen take a few days to help her on one of her guided rides. Free manual labor was always welcome in her book. Bailey put her work gloves in her back pocket and leaned over the railing. "I'm so glad you wanted to help out," she told Imogen honestly. "Summer and fall are my busiest seasons, so I bring in seasonal workers to do a lot of the chores. But we can get some large groups in here, and that's always interesting." Imogen laughed. "I'm sure you get a lot of really interesting people coming from all over." "Don't I ever. There's always one challenge in a group, but it's worth it in the end. Sometimes we get people new to horses, and sometimes we get accomplished riders. Both have their pros and cons." Bailey winked at her friend. "Now, I know you can do some barn chores, and you've had some practice with that recently, but if you're comfortable, I thought I'd put you on a horse and see what you know. I would love to have another wrangler. This group coming in is bigger than most." "I've ridden more in the last months than in the last decade," Imogen admitted. "That's right. I heard you did pretty good out there. You must have impressed Gabe because he's cautious on who rides his boys." "Oh, really?" Imogen cocked her head. "I'm not sure how impressed he was. He didn't make it seem like a big deal." "Well, no matter. I still can't believe you had to go on a search and rescue mission, only to have your aunt find Fortune in the goat pen again." Imogen rolled her eyes. "I just don't get it. He traveled miles uphill with the saddle hanging to his belly. Aunt Jo said she found the girth ripped on the edge of the woods and the saddle was on its side nearby. He had it on almost the whole way." "Horses are delicate, sure, but some of them can be masters of chaos. Fortune seems way too smart for his own good." Bailey leaned back against the railing as she talked. "He's something, all right," Imogen admitted. "He's incredibly intelligent and very sensitive. He's special." Bailey smiled. "They're all special in their way. I've got about 25 horses here of all breeds, ages, and riding levels, something for everyone. Most groups I like to keep small, no more than 6 riders, but this one I've got coming is going to be 10. If you can steer and stop well enough, then I'd love you to take the rear to help any stragglers." She reset her ball cap on her head, her long black hair falling over her shoulders. "Now, let's go meet the horses and see what you've got." Dutifully, Imogen followed behind. There were walking paths between each paddock, and Bailey led her to the center of the circle where a hitching post was hosting a cute little gray horse who dozed as he stood tied. A western saddle sat on the fence rail nearby. Bailey pointed at the horse. "That's Teddy. He's a real sweetheart, and while he's one of my younger horses, he's a real gentle and forgiving soul." She added a small warning. "But he's a real good judge of character. He won't toss you off, but if you don't connect with him or ask politely, he won't go even a step forward." Imogen inspected him closely. She didn't mind an opinionated animal. In fact, she loved them. Turning her attention to her host, she asked, "Can I groom him first?" Bailey smiled, pleased. "We'd both appreciate it if you did. Take some time to get to know him. I'm going to be pulling tack and cleaning it just over there." She nodded toward the barn. "If you have any questions, just give me a yell." Bailey walked off, her boots kicking up some dust and leaving Imogen to fend for herself. Imogen walked up to Teddy and let him smell her, rubbing his forehead when he nuzzled her. "Well, Teddy, I can't tell if this is a test or she's really as easygoing as she seems." She pulled out a curry comb and began to brush him in a circular manner. Humming to herself and occasionally talking to him, she groomed him and picked his hooves, loving that he was barefoot. Damn, did it make it easier to clean his feet. While it had been a few years, her muscle memory had kicked in, and it was like she'd never left the barn. Once he was clean and ready to go, she put on his pad and picked up his saddle, surprised by how light it was. It was heftier than the English saddle she was used to, but she remembered how hard it was to raise a Western saddle over her head when she'd tried in the past. She felt confident until she got to the girth. Bailey? Can you come check my tack and make sure I've done the Western cinch correctly?" Her friend walked purposefully toward her and inspected her work. "Good job so far, but let's just place the saddle and pad back a tad further so it's not on his shoulders." She then walked Imogen through how to unwrap the leather latigo and tie it in a foursquare. Imogen appreciated that not only was her friend willing to teach her something without making her feel like an idiot, but gave her the chance to practice it herself. When they were both satisfied, Imogen put on the bridle, gave Teddy a scratch on his forehead again, and led him to the mounting block. Before she got all the way there, she smacked her head. "Whoops, I forgot my helmet over on the railing." She led him over so she could affix it securely to her head and came back. "Perfect. Let's ride, buddy." Throwing the reins over his neck, she put one foot in the stirrup and threw her leg over, sitting quietly on his back. Bailey nodded, pleased so far. It was clear her new friend had at least some horse experience. Now, these horses are both English and Western trained, so they can direct rein and indirect rein. Use one or both hands, whatever you're comfortable with, and we'll do a short ride in the arena. She walked next to the mounted pair and closed the gate behind them when they reached an area filled with blue stone, some vertical poles, and ground poles. "Track right to begin and let's see a nice working walk." She guided them through a variation of exercises that included steering around pop-up barrels and over the poles in each direction at the walk and trot. Imogen was thrilled to be back on a horse again. Teddy was attuned to her movements and seemed to anticipate her requests before she made them. She reached forward and scratched his neck. "Can we canter?" she asked hopefully. Bailey laughed and agreed. At the word canter, Teddy's ears pricked, and when Imogen sat back, he broke into a comfortable, rocking beat. Bailey had seen enough. Imogen's grin took over her whole face, and Teddy looked pretty content with her on his back. She knew that although he was kind, he was also very sensitive and would have been annoyed if his rider fussed with him too much. He knew his job and didn't appreciate anyone getting in his way. Coming to a halt in the center of the ring, Imogen laughed and scratched him once again. "I love him. What a good boy." Teddy snorted and reached his neck down to stretch. Bailey approached them as Imogen dismounted easily. "Well, you know more than I thought. How do you feel about wrangling some tourists with me over the next few days? It's 3 days in the saddle, but we break it up into 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon after lunch here. Every time we go out, it's a new trail system, mostly wooded with slight grades in elevation, and a couple good meadows if the riders are comfortable enough, where we can open it up." Imogen was thrilled at the chance. Now that she'd opened her mind to helping Bailey, she realized that getting off her aunt's farm and spending some time riding would be heaven. "I can't wait. It's so hard to believe that you get paid to do this." Bailey gave her a wry grin. "It's not all trail rides, trust me, although it's my favorite part of the course. A few years ago, I built yurts so that our riders could stay here and glamp on the farm. It's a lot of work, but they love the whole experience." "What's not to love?" Imogen asked as she began untacking Teddy. "I have a real serious question for you, though." Bailey waited, cocking an eyebrow. "What the hell is a yurt?" The guffaw was so loud that it startled a couple of horses and the crows that were lounging about in the fields. It took Bailey a few seconds to regain her composure, and when she could get herself back under control, she had to wipe tears from her eyes. Rather than be offended, Imogen just waited. It was an honest question. Taking a deep breath, Bailey pointed at the round canvas buildings on the outskirts of the tree line that Imogen had spotted when she drove up. "Those are yurts. They are nomadic huts that they use in Siberia and Mongolia, although they call them gers there, that can be picked up and moved with the nomads. Ours are obviously built in for permanent use." "Are they like big tents?" Bailey nodded in agreement. "A little like that, but more. I'll show you." She beckoned Imogen to put Teddy in a nearby paddock and then led the way. They walked up 3 steps onto a platform, and then she opened a beautifully painted orange door. They both had to bend over to enter, Bailey especially since she must have been about 5'10", and entered the darkened space. Light from a hole in the center of the roof shed limited light on the area. Directly underneath was a small wood-burning oven. The walls were covered in thick fur, and when Imogen reached out to touch, was surprised that it felt like wool fleece. It was tied to wooden slats that acted like walls. Thick rugs covered the flooring, and a bed was on the far side of the room. It was small, but homey. "This is amazing. I've never seen anything like it." Imogen twirled in a circle to take everything in. "What if it rains? Doesn't it get wet in here?" "It would, except that we can use a rope on the outside of the yurt to close the flap over it and keep it insulated and dry. It's comfortable even in the winter, but I'd rather stay at Harper's when it's cold." Imogen nodded. "I can imagine. This is so cool. I've never gone on any trip like the one you've created here. I am thrilled to help." Bailey smiled and adjusted her ball cap on her head. "I'm glad, because I have a full house this week, and you're going to be bunking with me. I hope you like camping." Imogen grinned. "I guess we'll find out."